two, one. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Lusting Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson, and joining me is a return guest. Anthony had joined me during 30 Days of Springsteen. We talked Devils and Dust, and we had so much fun. I said, "Hey, any chance you would want to come and do a normal episode," as I say with air quotes, and you were kind enough to say yes. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I hope this is normal if that's the expectation. And I'm glad I was asked back. It's fun to talk Bruce, and I get to do it with a few folks in my life, but not that many people that you run into want to hear our level of obsession. So it falls on deaf ears sometimes. So it's nice to have a conversation like this.
I've said this many times. I have told my wife, "Do you want to hear a story? Is it about Bruce?" Never mind. Right, just give up.
Yeah.
Well, for those of you who did not hear the episode, go back and listen to it. We had a lot of fun talking about that album. But tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm a New Jerseyan, so no big surprise there. A lot of Springsteen fans, of course, are. Born and raised in Northeast New Jersey, Clifton, a stone's throw or a few stones throw away from East Rutherford in the Meadowlands, where I've seen Bruce many times. I'm currently living in Northwest New Jersey, so about an hour and a half from New York City, about an hour and a half, 2 hours from Philadelphia, not too far from the Pennsylvania state line. I've got three children, married to my wife Cheryl, which it'll be this coming year, 19, where are we? Oh, this coming year will be 30 years, actually. Yeah, September 2025 will be 30 years. And three kids, not really kids anymore. My youngest is 19, and then two boys, 26, 28. And I've spent most of my career, really all of it, in finance and accounting, although the last decade I focused more on finding people work within finance and accounting. So I don't practice per se finance and accounting, but rather I recruit, headhunt, I guess you can call it, help people find work. So and I am a part-time minister. I know we got into a little bit of faith and
Yeah.
spirituality with respect to Devils and Dust, and so that certainly informs me as well. Within the United Methodist Church, I pastor a small church out here. So yeah, that's some of it.
That's a pretty diverse palette that you're doing. So you grew up in Jersey. Talk about what kind of music was your family listening to when you were growing up?
Yeah, so good question. And it's funny, I've thought about that a little bit more lately, not because it was something for us to get into tonight, but because about 8, 9 months ago, I bought a record player and I got back into collecting some vinyl. And so it brought me back to thinking growing up, because that's how most of the music was played. I remember I can still see the stereo in our living room now. It had a record player and it had an 8-track player. And my mom had a handful of 8 tracks and then records. Johnny Mathis was definitely, especially around the holidays, Johnny Mathis would come out often. Some Barry Manilow, definitely some Frank Sinatra, some Elvis. And I think the probably the one guy that now I'll listen to a fair amount of Sinatra, certainly some Elvis, but the one guy that in some ways a little bit of a bridge to Bruce that my mom listened to is Neil Diamond. There was something about his full kind of husky voice, I think, that resonated with me. And when some of his work in particular, I see some similarities there between him and Bruce. But yeah, that was, and we had, it's funny, now I've got the radio on all the time. So if you're in our house, it's rare that there's not some music kind of playing in the background. Growing up, I wouldn't say it was exactly like that, probably because you had to always engage the music, right? You didn't
Yeah.
put on Sirius XM and just let it go. Quite a bit. My mom, when we were very young, she was home and she was a cleaner. She'd always be tidying up the house and she'd do it with records or an 8-track playing. Music definitely filled our houses. We didn't talk about it a lot, but it definitely filled our homes.
The often, and you've talked a little bit on this, I find my guests go into two categories.
Yeah.
Overgeneralization is those who enjoyed their parents' music, and then as they got in their teen years, they expanded their horizons, but never really abandoned their parents' music. And others just could not stand their parents'
Mm,
music. And then when they turn 35, they go, "Oh, that guy Johnny Cash Dad liked,
mm.
he's pretty good." Sounds maybe you're a little of the second one?
Yeah, I think so. Listen, I'm not other than the Johnny Mathis Christmas album, and I'm definitely not putting Johnny Mathis on. And so some of the kind of lighter touches, there's no Barbara Streisand or Barry Manilow really in my collection. But yeah, definitely, like I said, definitely Presley, definitely Neil Diamond, and definitely Sinatra, who would be the one that would be sort of an outlier, right? He would by no definition be in the category of rock or pop music,
Yeah,
um, but yet something about, particularly I think for the right occasion, right? If we're sitting
yeah,
down for dinner, maybe you've got some company over, there's just something about his voice and his music that touches me. Although I will say to your point about, hey, you come back to it and at some point say, hey, that Johnny Cash, he wasn't so bad. Definitely as a teenager, I wasn't looking for Sinatra. It was probably more in my 30s and 40s that it was like,
yeah.
oh, hey, that's got a nice swing to it.
Did you watch the Elvis documentary that just came out with Bruce
I did.
contributing?
I did.
I thought that was an interesting about Sinatra was the role model, right? Like you
Mm,
don't everything. I recorded on Saturday. I haven't released it yet,
yeah.
but David Hepworth has written a book, Hope I Get Old Before I Die, Why Rock Stars Never Retire. His he starts off the book talking about Live Aid and how toward the end of the night the Grand Master, the senior statesman
Hmm.
of rock and roll, Paul McCartney, comes on stage. He's going to do Let It Be, and he was
Okay.
43.
Mm, yeah.
And it's a fascinating book, and we had a great discussion. I urge everyone that when it comes out to listen to it, because he talks about how much music has changed. That in the 60s, adults didn't go to rock and roll shows. There's this
Yeah.
teenage, early teen, and now then at a rock and roll show, you're 7 to 70. That just
Yeah.
it's because it's generational.
Yeah.
So,
For sure. Yeah, just I particularly enjoyed that Elvis documentary. We had watched friends of ours come over on most Sundays, and for a good while, we've been doing what we call a film festival. One of
oh,
us will
nice.
will choose a movie. Sometimes we'll say, okay, here's the theme for the next rotation,
Yeah.
and you pick one. And I forget exactly what the theme was, but my friend Chad, he selected Blue Hawaii, right? So we
Hmm.
watched that film, and in many ways it's it's just a terrible film, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I thought was particularly interesting and what resonated me watching the documentary, because I really didn't realize how Presley was trapped and pushed into
Hmm.
doing all that, right? And how that was such a compromise for him. It's clear that it was when you watch it. What was he thinking, right? The documentary really brings out the reality that this was not something that felt like that it was tied to a great deal of integrity for his own career and his own talent. So it was interesting. But yeah.
What's sad, Anthony, is Blue Hawaii is one of the better ones.
Oh God.
Jailhouse Rock obviously is a little bit better. King Creole was a
Uh-huh.
more serious, but Blue Hawaii is considered one of the better light movies.
Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
those are fun to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got out of the habit, but we had some really dear friends, and we did movie nights for a couple of years,
Yeah.
where about once a month we'd take turns going to someone's house, and we would pick a film that
Uh-huh.
none of us had watched, or at least only one of us, and take turns watching it.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun, you know.
Yeah.
Even if
Yeah.
the movie's bad, it's fun just to be there enjoying companionship and friendship and just all that together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now listen, yeah, a real bad movie has a certain entertainment to it, right?
Yes, it does. So, can you remember when you first discovered Bruce
Mm.
and what about him spoke to you?
I, it, Born in 72, I'm 52 now. So 1984, 85, I'm 12, 13. And obviously
Yeah.
Bruce is about to and then explodes onto the scene with Born in the USA. Um, so definitely And I'm at an age where music is starting, I'm starting to notice music with some level of seriousness or consciousness, as much
Yeah.
as a 12 or 13-year-old can do. I think my age and what was happening in terms of Bruce's popularity, it was somewhat unavoidable. And the music itself, just musically, it resonated with me. I talked a little bit before about Neil Diamond, and I think about some of the other artists that I liked in that time, Bob Seger as a prime example. Even to this day, there's something about that huskier, deep voice that is striking to me. Bruce's voice has always, when it continues in its different forms, to just be something that kind of stops me in my tracks. He could cover anything, and it's probably sacrilegious to the original artist, especially if it's something a tremendous song, like to say that, oh, he's doing it better. And I'm not suggesting he is, but something about hearing anything sung by him is significant to me, right? So I think there's those elements. My sisters had gotten into him some. I've well surpassed from a fandom perspective at this point. They enjoy him still, and they'll maybe go see him once if they can, but they didn't get hooked the way I did. But yet it was their influence because they were older than me, and they both had friends, boyfriends at the time that also liked Bruce. And so I recall them listening. I vaguely remember Born in the USA kind of hitting the airwaves and liking some of those songs. I remember them owning a cassette of The River and listening to it. And I have these faint memories of being in another room and hearing them listen to it and it being impactful to me. So I think their influence was definitely noteworthy. And then I had the opportunity, and that's probably when we get into maybe the live portion of seeing Bruce. I was lucky enough to have a friend when I was in the summer of '85, so I would have been between seventh and eighth grade basically. And a buddy, his parents got tickets and invited me to go. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later as far as the live experience. But the rest, as they say, was history from there, because that was definitely an impactful night for me. And listen, what resonates to this day, of course, are the stories, the narratives, the
Yeah.
lyrics, the way he can pen a phrase. And it's funny, I was thinking about this today, knowing that we were going to talk tonight. And I think when you come to music as a young person, as a teenager or a preteen, which that's when most people discover music in some form, you're always behind the artist from a
Yeah.
maturity standpoint. At that point, I'm 12 or 13. Bruce Springsteen is 35, 36, right? Even his earliest work is written when he's 23,
Yeah.
24. Born in the US, Born to Run is written when he's 25, 26. What do I know about a 25, 26-year-old guy, right? And yet it's still connected with me. And I think just because the themes, right? Call it desire,
Yeah.
passion, the search for freedom, maybe insecurity, some despair, like all those things are with you from a very young age. So even if the characters and stories might have had some different circumstances, I think that they still their feelings and their emotions resonated with me. Get a song like Nebraska, right? In no world am I gonna go on a killing spree, right? On
Yeah.
a practical level, I cannot begin to relate and fathom with those circumstances, but I could still understand despair, right? Or sadness, maybe fear, anger, right? The emotions that could lead to such desperation, right? I think, and Bruce writes of the human experience, right? And it's for him, it's an American experience, and it's clearly universal, right? Now, how much of that could I possibly know or articulate when I was 12 or 13? Very little, if any, right? But I think that's, as I try to think about it now, all these years later, that's what was grabbing me, right? And then it continues
Yeah.
to grab me all these 40 years later.
Yes. You mentioned going to see him live, and so I always like to preface,
Mm.
Anthony, the amount of times you've seen Bruce live is a
Yeah,
bad barometer of how big of a fan.
sure.
But if you are someone who counts, how
Yeah.
many?
So this is a sore point with me, Jesse, because
Okay.
and what I'm going to say is it's somewhere north of 80 times.
Okay.
And when I say it's a sore point is because the accountant in me at one point had a wonderful spreadsheet that documented all the
Yes.
times that I saw him. Somewhere in a prior Macintosh, I lost that information. And then I also made a terrible mistake, although it wouldn't have filled all the gaps. But at some point when I was moving, I said, what do I need to keep all these ticket stubs for, right? I had them all collected in an envelope, and then at some point I said,
Yeah.
"Oh, this is." I'm always going through these phases where I don't want to be the guy that saves everything, right? And so I'm like, what do I really need these for? And
Yeah.
so now I can't even go back to those. And I did. There's been a couple occasions where I've gone to, I think it's Bruce Base or something, where you can look at all, and I've begun to try to recreate it, and I just feel at this point I can't know that I'm accurate,
Yeah.
even by looking at set lists and stuff, because I've there's so many shows that I was able to attend, but then I've listened to so many shows that the lines between where what I actually saw live and what I've heard, through bootleg or through Nugs
Yeah.
now, it's quite blurred, right? So I just know that at some point I was telling people that it was over 80 times, and a lot of those occasions are almost all of them are really in the Northeast, right? I'm lucky living in New Jersey that in 1999 we had 15 cracks to see him in the arena, right? And then 10 times in the stadium. And I wouldn't go to 15, but I would see 7 or 8 of those 15, and then
Hmm.
5 or 6 of the 10. And then he would do 10 nights in Madison Square Garden. I'd get to 4 or 5 of those, right? So, yeah, I've seen him a bunch, mostly New Jersey, a bunch New York, Philly, Connecticut, DC once or twice. So, yeah, it's a bunch.
Are there a couple of shows that stand out?
Yeah, there are. I mean, I'll always have to, although I don't have a great recollection of it. I mean, I always have to point to the first one. And again, I think it might have been August 22nd, but it could have been one of the other August dates in 85 in Giant Stadium. What I do remember, and this is the story I tell, what I remember from that night, I remember out in the street playing, okay? We had nice seats. It was on the side of the stage and maybe 10, 15 rows up. You're still a good distance away. Giant Stadium any stadium is so large. But I remember everyone standing. And
Yeah.
again, I'm 13 years old and I'm not a particularly big kid. So it's mostly adults. And so I just remember people towering around me. I remember that song, and I remember it certainly felt like everyone was singing. It felt like everyone
Yeah.
knew every word. And whether this was a thought at the time or one that I've constructed in my mind since, that moment resonated with me because there was something about being part of that crowd. There was
Yeah.
a community, and I just remember thinking, like, I don't know all these words, but I want to be part of that, right?
Yeah.
Whatever that is, I want to be part of that. So that, yeah, that very first one's got to be there. The other two that I'll just, because again, I was thinking about this before, the other two, and there's many of them, but the other two I'll raise up would be oddly, maybe odd to some, when Bruce toured with the other band and he came back around for the benefit on June 24th,
Hmm.
93. And a lot of the E Street Band guested, including Clarence. There's a great Nugs recording of that,
Yeah.
thankfully, in our archives recording. And it'll never do it justice, but you can hear it in the recording. Like when Clarence hits the stage, I've never had a louder singular moment, experienced a louder singular moment than that one that night. And we were on the first level, about halfway up around center court, but you could feel the stadium moving under your feet.
Yeah.
And that was just from start to finish. That was a captivating and great show. The other one I remember is it was September 24th of 99. It was a show that was rescheduled because there was a hurricane 8 days prior and it had to get rescheduled. It was in
Hmm.
the Spectrum, which was on its way out, and it was the day after Bruce's birthday, the day after his 50th birthday. And so he was
Yeah.
50 years old in one day, and he was just on fire, right? It was one of those shows where you might look at the set list and think, okay, is it that much different than any other one? It had a few special moments in it, but there was just something about the performance that was just next level. So Those would be the ones I'd point to. And then I've always loved the acoustic stuff. I was lucky to see Springsteen on Broadway, which was incredible. Those are very different experiences, but definitely memorable as well.
Yeah. I had a similar experience. 2002, I have The Rising
Mm,
is my first show.
yeah.
I had bought the CD, but I had only listened to it a couple of times. And I went in and I just had not spent a lot of time with The Rising or the deep catalog. And the story I tell, and I think yours is better said, more articulate about hearing everyone sing and wanting to be part of it.
Mm,
To me, I felt like I'd walked into the second half of a movie,
yeah.
right? And I could
Yeah.
tell it was a really good movie, but I quite didn't know what was going on. And I
Yeah.
really wanted to know that plot. I wanted to
Yeah.
know. So, yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
saw it walking into the second half of the movie. And I remember when Bruce did the Super Bowl halftime, he described it as what they wanted to accomplish was like if you were walking into the encores and this is all you got. Okay, this is what he was going to give you. So another very early memory, again, 1985, right? I had that first experience where my friend Edward Harrington St. Andrew's School in Clifton, New Jersey, my childhood buddy, he takes me to that first concert. During that same run, I'm able to tag along with my sisters and their boyfriends. They're older, 16, 18 years old. There's cars. And we go at least once, probably twice. We go to the stadium, don't have tickets. But back then, at 11 o'clock, right about when the encores would start, they would literally open the gates if you were waiting outside, and you'd run out, you'd run into the stadium, and they would let you fill in the side section right where they stopped selling it because it was obstructed, and you could fill in right there, and you'd literally for nothing you would see an hour's worth of music because the encore was legitimately a full hour. And I remember as a kid, it's 12, 13, that was wild. Now it sounds even, they would never do it now for security reasons, but it was pretty wild that there's all these people that are around the stadium and they're listening. Oh, let's just let them in at 11 o'clock.
How cool is that,
That
though?
is. I've never heard anyone else talk about that.
I've never
I,
heard that.
I'm sure I'm not alone. And so for those that do listen to this, send me and Jesse a note if you've had that same
Yes.
experience. And it couldn't have been just a Giant Stadium thing. It had to exist at other stadiums, I would think.
Yeah.
But it absolutely was a thing back then.
I've heard, especially in Europe, but in other places too, where you could hear the music outside the arena.
Sure.
So you couldn't see the show, but you could hear it.
Yeah, I'm not making it up.
But no, I believe you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other story that's something like that, a freebie, if you will, and this is deep within Springsteen lore. People know about the Men in
Yeah.
Black, right? And the upgrades. I never got an upgrade from the heavens to the front
Hmm.
row. But when I saw Bruce in Philly, just me and my son, this was the Magic Tour. So you're talking 2007, 2000. He would have been 9 or 10 when it was just me and him. It was really cool. We went out to Philly. We sat in the parking lot. We threw the ball around, and I had floor seats, but not pit seats. For that particular tour, they had the pit seats, and then the floor was just open, right? There weren't seats on the floor. And, a guy in black, right? One of the men in black, he saw me trying to jockey for an angle before the show. And I think the fact that I had this 9-year-old kid who was connected to my hip,
Yeah.
it caught his attention, and he put two wristbands, one on my wrist and one on my son's, which allowed us to go to the pit. The pit was pretty roomy, so me and my son just hung out. I put him on my shoulders at one point, and that was an awesome memory.
I went to my wife and I said, "Hey, I really want to go see Bruce. Can I go?" And she's, "Yes, go." Rolling her eyes. And I had this horrible seat. It was like it was at the lower level, but it was at the very last row,
Uh-huh.
and the my seat To the right of me was the aisle, and to the left was a pillar.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm there. And boy, I had listened to Devils and Dust so many times, Anthony. I was
Yeah.
so ready. And he goes, a guy comes up and says, "Hey, do you want a better ticket?" And I'm thinking scalpers.
Right. Right.
I go, "No, I'm fine. I'm fine." And it took me like 2 minutes to go, "Wait a minute. You're
Yeah.
inside the venue.
Yeah.
That this is not a scalper." So I went back and I said, "Hi, do you still have tickets available?" "Oh, yeah, sure." So he handed me tickets. Not as good tickets as Daryl Johnston because he was in front of me, but better than Babe Laufenberg, who was the backup quarter for the Cowboys during the Super Bowl role. And so I was right in the middle of that. And
Yeah.
those are the best seats I've ever had.
And that I know for Devils and Dust, he would play some arenas, cut off the seating. None of the back of the
Yeah.
arena was sold. Was that in a like the Reunion Arena or something? Or
No, this was in Grand Prairie,
okay.
and it is only 4,000 seats. Melissa Etheridge and the Indigo Girls are going to play that a little bit later. So it's like a nice small
Yeah.
theater more than arena.
Yeah.
Has really good sound. And anytime I've ever gone anyone there, I've really enjoyed it. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's awesome.
Obviously, you wanted to talk about Devils and Dust, but let's talk about, are there other albums or
Mm,
songs that mean a lot to you?
mm. Yeah,
And you
there's
can't say all of them.
yeah, I know. There are. I'll start with telling you what I think is the only bad song I've ever heard of Bruce's that he
Okay.
wrote. It's the New Jersey Devil. I don't even know what the heck that is. That you know that song, right?
So
That's the only one. My point is I like all the rest.
so one of the other podcasts I do is Perfectly Good Podcast, where Sylvan Groth and I are talking about every John Hiatt song in alphabetical order.
Yeah.
We have a rating system, and Sylvan will say a 1-star song is, of course, it's a good song because it's John,
Yep.
but you might skip it. And I'm like, no, even John can have bad songs. And
Yeah.
they're like, because Bruce, New Jersey Devil, pretty bad song.
It's a little too experimental. I don't know what's
Yeah.
going on there. But yeah, listen, my favorite song, not unsurprising, it's probably the most popular Springsteen song is Thunder Road. That song will always speak to me. It just opens up, right? It opens up life. It makes my soul soar, right? So
Yeah.
that'll always be number one for me. And Born to Run will always be my favorite album. It's perfection to me, right? Just 8 songs that you can't debate any of them as far
Yeah.
as their merit and them being outstanding. If I think about, I've toyed with, I do these lists every once in a while, like my favorite songs. If I think of songs that are high on my list that maybe aren't on everyone's list, one of my favorites is Living Proof. And I think a lot of people
Yeah.
have a great deal of respect for that song, but it's probably top 10 or 15, so pretty high for me. And then if I think about more recent songs and favorites, certainly this century, I think Land of Hope and Dreams, which is on the edge of this century, is
Yeah.
probably the best song he's written in the 21st century. Yeah, he doesn't really put many clunkers on an album. I got for Christmas, I got the album collection, volume 1 and volume 2. And so I put Greetings on to start it off. And I swear the Angel never sounded so good to me. And I think it's one of his least effective songs. And yet I listened to it and it was like I was hearing it for the first time. I was like, this one's pretty good. That and Mary Queen of Arkansas would be pretty low, but boy,
Yeah.
they sounded pretty good spinning on the record player.
Yeah. One of the things that my friend Sam and I used to talk about is we'd be in the car going to lunch. And when we worked together, we went to lunch together 19 of the 20 days of the month, right? It
Yeah,
just, oh, and we'd always hear be the boss, right? I'm the boss today, and
yep,
I'm the boss.
yep.
And we would always say, why would you waste one of your slots with Thunder Road? That's everyone's favorite song.
Yeah,
Like I get it, but we all love Thunder Road, right?
yeah,
You only have 5 slots to
yeah.
share. And so we were listening, and sure enough, the person doing
Yeah,
Jimmy picked Margaritaville, and I'm like,
yeah,
why?
yeah,
So
yeah.
anyway, not judging people if they want
I've got to confess then, Jesse, I did be the boss once.
Tender Road.
I picked, in fact, I selected the live version from what I think was my first concert in 1985.
Okay, now see,
And
that's a different story.
I was telling my story, right? The way I approached that episode was telling a bit of a life story, if you will, and
Yeah.
so that fit in. But I also, whenever every once in a while, I'll hear Jim Rottola say, "Hey, call in your requests or text in your requests or tweet your requests to me." And I always think, what would I possibly tell him? Whatever song I want to hear, I can just pull it off the shelf and play it. So for me, the Be the Boss wasn't about exposing anyone to a song because I figured everyone has already heard it. It was just
Hmm.
telling my story. But yeah, but I want to do that again. And when I do it again, it'll take on a whole different
Well,
approach.
I would love to do it again too, because when I first did it, I wasn't doing the podcast.
Yeah.
I picked Linda Let Me Be the One because
Mm,
my wife's name is Linda.
yeah.
Land of Hope and Dreams because, hey, it's Land of Hope and Dreams,
Yeah.
which, as you talked about, in during our wrapping up Springsteen in 24 episode, we talked about buying the greatest hits CD. And I
Uh-huh.
told the story. I'm a mark. I'm a mark. I'm just call me like a wrestling fan. If it's got Bruce, I'm going to buy it.
Yeah.
And a couple people did, a couple people didn't. But someone brought up, how can you not have Land of Hope and Dreams when you've got the best, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just, but there's other songs that everyone else would say the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I put on tracks disc 4, right?
Okay.
And so here's what I think most would agree is the weakest disc of those 4 discs, right?
Yeah.
So here's the weakest disc of a set of songs that Bruce threw away, didn't fit, right?
Yeah.
And I just have listening to the disc, not the first time, not the 10th time, but I posted, boy, I'm listening to disc 4 of tracks, and we'd all agree it's probably the lesser of the discs, and it's just outtakes, but I'm like, boy, does it sound good, right? It's just there's a maturity to it on those particular songs, and there's some tracks there that are just keepers. The point of that is that he really hasn't written too many bad songs. He's definitely written some bad songs, but I think those are somewhere in those bootleg collections that I've
Hmm.
collected a little bit over
Yeah.
time, where you've got like 20 different versions of Born to Run. Yeah, I don't really need to hear all of those. Some of
Yeah.
that probably should stay where it is, but
Yeah.
in terms of what he's put out and then a whole bunch that he still hasn't, there's not a lot of bad stuff in there.
So I know it is fool's gold
Yeah.
to guess what is going to happen, but do you have a theory when he says he's got new music?
He has more than once said something that sounds like a tracks two, and like then like literally he's on a couple of occasions he said it in interviews as if it was coming out soon, and then
Right.
nothing happened. And so I could only think that that's it. The rumor has been that it's tracks two, but yet broken down by full albums. So like full albums that never got out but were contemplated.
Is
And and it
right.
sounds like a lot of like
Yeah.
90s into maybe there's a certain period. We're not going to see a whole bunch of stuff from the 70s or 80s. I don't think it exists, right? In quality form. But I think there's a lot of stuff in the mid 90s and a little bit beyond that never quite got out.
Yeah, and I think partly the theory could be he doesn't record as much as he used to, right? Like doing 30 songs to get down to 10 or 40. But he has said in interviews that he's gotten fully done albums that just didn't want to put
Yeah.
out yet. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm really looking forward to whatever he gets me. I'm going to go back to one of the things you said to begin this. When I saw when I saw the volume 1 of the covers album, I went, okay, give me Bruce
Yeah.
Springsteen sings country western
Yeah.
on volume
Yeah.
2. pick a Merle Haggard, pick a Hank
I mean,
Williams, pick a Willie Nelson song. I'm in,
yeah.
right? I
I
have
mean,
no,
and Bruce has teased it. I've heard him talk about wanting to do like a Christmas album,
yeah,
which for most of my life I thought, no, that's ridiculous. But
yeah,
I'm all ready for that. I mean, Blue Christmas, he does it pretty
yeah,
well. Give it to
yeah, he
me.
does. I'm
Yeah.
in.
Yeah, we're not getting any younger. None of us are. So
That's right.
it
Yeah.
frustrates the heck out of me that
Hmm.
I know there's a lot of variables probably that these additional tracks or these additional
Yeah.
albums are like, what are we waiting for?
Yeah.
You know how much they're going to sell. You can almost predict it's not going to, especially if it's a large set, it's not going to sell a gazillion copies, but you're not going to lose money. We
Yeah.
want it. Just give it to us.
And I posted on social media,
Yeah, I saw
right?
that for it was up there.
On good for Sony that I'm happy for them. By the way, I love I remember the whole accounting and spreadsheet. I remember after my fourth or fifth show, I put all the songs on a spreadsheet and then did a pivot table to see what percentage
Yeah.
I got different shows. Is there songs you're still chasing, my friend?
For a long time, I was chasing Living Proof, like with the E Street Band,
Okay.
um,
Yeah.
and I got that in August of 2016 at the Meadowlands. The funny thing is that it's one of those songs, and I'm sure if he put it in a regular rotation, this would change. But the reality is that the few times he's done it with the E Street Band, it's I think it's one of those songs that the other band nailed it and the E Street
Yeah.
Band has not. It just they just haven't done it enough and it just always was a little off. So even though I got that song, I actually had a sign that night and he picked a sign. It wasn't mine, but
Yeah.
we had heard him. We were online waiting for the pit and we heard the sound check and so we knew that it could be coming. So I was excited. I think the version was didn't compare to the way the band did it in 92, 93, the way Roy's organ kind of just soared towards the end of that particular live version. I want to see some of the Western Stars stuff. I'd love to
Yeah.
see
Oh, yeah.
Accused or
Yeah.
I mean, I know Patty's health is going to be an ongoing thing, but I'd love to see him and her do Moonlight Motel or Stones live. So things like that. But I don't know if there's anything that I'm chasing anymore. I've been lucky, especially being in this area, being in New Jersey, right? You get the Jersey Girls and the Jungle Lands, and even on tours that those don't make a lot of appearances, they pop up. And he's had a really, when you think about the 2016 year, and like there, he was just playing so many different songs, right? He did the album thing, right? Like seeing the river in fullness, right?
Yeah.
I would still be chasing a drive all night or a stolen car or a price you pay because those are just great
Yeah.
underplayed tracks, but I got to hear the whole darn thing. So you got all of those too. So yeah, there's nothing I need to see. I just want to see him again. And whatever he plays, it'll be wonderful.
Anthony, is there anything I should have asked you that I haven't?
I did love that Thunder Road question.
With that, yeah.
We'll end with that one. Okay.
Yes. Okay. All right, Anthony, we're gonna have to do this again. You don't have a choice. You're just
All
gonna have
right.
to come back.
All
I
right, I'm
love
on.
visiting with you so much. But if you are new to the program and you're checking it out, thank you. But I end every podcast with what I call the Mary question. And what that
Yeah.
is, Jay Armstrong, who is a retired English teacher who has a new book coming out in February. I will be talking about that coming up. But he would give his students the lyrics to Thunder Road, and
Yeah.
they would read it. They would talk about the themes Bruce explores, the themes, the the illusions he builds, and then he would ask his class, do they think Mary gets in the car? So,
Yeah.
Anthony, that is your question. Does Mary
Yeah.
get in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
All right, I'm going to give you a little bit of a cop out because I went back and forth on this, right? So I'm going to give you my yes and my no.
Okay, I
My
love it.
yeah, my first reaction was absolutely the way the music itself, the saxophone solo takes off in the end, right? And it hits the crescendo and it just again, it just makes your heart soar. Like to me, the music is saying, yeah, she got in the car and now away we go, right? So that's my yes. Now, I thought about, and then the other reason that I would say that I could say yes is that I've heard Bruce talk about that album as being like taking place over the course of a day, right? So Thunder Road is the beginning and it's morning, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, she's got to get in the car because that's how the story starts out, right? Yes. Now, where I can say, I can posit the idea of a no would be in the context of the album. The next song is 10th Avenue Freeze Out. This is the band, right? This is
Right.
not a guy and a girl. This is a band. And then I start to wonder maybe she doesn't get into the car. The singer rides off, and her no opens up the possibility of the band as community, and then we go from there, right?
Yeah.
From a biographical standpoint, Bruce, he dates people or whatever, but he doesn't make that connection. He makes that connection long after he's made the band connection, right? So it's the
Right.
band that gets born before a relationship with another gets born. The answer is no.
If someone wants to reach you, how can they?
Yeah, I just would say email. It's
Okay.
A as in Anthony, my last name Pami, P-A-I at live.com. If you just search that and put in New Jersey, I'm sure you'll find me on Facebook. I did get a small handful of folks that reached out after our last podcast. It was, I think, primarily through Facebook. And so it was nice to hear that some of
Good.
the stories resonated with them. So, yeah.
Good. My friend, this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's, we're in New Jersey. There's drones flying overhead. We've got 4 years of an adventure coming up, Jesse. And I don't know what's the new year is exactly bringing, but when I read that article about Bruce and the 50th anniversary of Born to Run and some sort of retrospective box set, that sounds good to me.
There's hope, right?
Have
Yeah, so absolutely. Thank you so much. Listeners, thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. As always, would love for you to go to iTunes, rate and review the podcast. If you're listening on Spotify, you can add comments there. Anything you can do to share the podcast would be greatly appreciated. Thank you, Anthony. We will have you back.
Thank
Everyone
you.
else, be safe, be kind, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Jesse.